What a day thus far. If you're not planning to, tune in to Brett Baer tonight. Going to interview President Zelensky of Ukraine after a meltdown in the Oval Office, which I'll cover briefly. So if you're listening, my priors. I guess I can say my daughter did missionary trips to the Ukraine 20 years ago. I'm a big believer in free Ukraine. I'm very glad that Trump sent them lethal weapons. I think President Obama caused the first invasion. I think President Biden invited the second invasion. Indeed, he did so. A minor incursion wouldn't matter. I want Donald Trump to continue the aid that Ukraine needs. I believe it is in America's best interest to have a free Ukraine, and I believe it's necessary to get a stable and enduring peace. This was a very unfortunate blow-up that happened. I do not know who's advising Zelensky. I've talked to the Ukrainian ambassador before. She has her head turned on straight. But first, let's just listen to where it went off the rails, cut 19.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are
Mr.
not
President,
strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
That.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering
position
on
to
this question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this.
what
I'm not
You're in
dictating.
no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very
You
strong.
will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position.
I
You don't
was
have the cards right now. With us, you start having
not
cards.
playing
But
cards.
right now, you don't.
I'm very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're gambling
I'm
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What you-
III.
what you
You're
thinking
gambling
about?
with
What you
World
thinking
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. It's
with
back
all
to you.
respect to your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once?
A lot of times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you.
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States
what
of
you're
America
speaking about.
and the president who's trying to save your country.
Cut number 20.
Excuse me, that was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards, but without us, you don't have any cards.
Cut 21.
Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No.
Can
You've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn
We-
good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said thank
stupid
you.
president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
if
West
you didn't
You
have our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak-
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
Cut number 22. Last cut.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this, I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times thank you to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on out here. I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low
know.
on soldiers. Listen,
Please,
you're running
Mr.
low on
President.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And
President.
then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I wanted this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than a degree.
All right. That's going to be the most replayed 5 minutes in American diplomatic history on film. It will be studied for decades, centuries, like the Melian dialogue. And I had fun this weekend with Trey Gowdy because he used the Melian dialogue and I used the Melian dialogue, and nobody knows what it is anyway. But it's one of those moments where the Melians or the Melians go to the Spartans and they warn them about Athens. And the Spartans don't do anything. So the history of international conflict is pretty long, and there are moments that stand out, and this is one of those moments. I am a big supporter of Ukraine. I don't want this to get worse. President Zelensky is going to go on with Brett Baer tonight in what will be the most watched and most significant news interview outside of an American presidential debate, and probably even including those two debates, because they were not unusual events. This will go completely sideways. And there are people in the Republican Party who want it to go completely sideways. There are a lot of Democrats who want it to go completely sideways and for Ukraine to fail, because there are some people in the United States who would rather have Donald Trump fail than Ukraine survive with a durable and stable peace. Understand, my priors don't matter, your priors don't matter. What matters is Ukraine is a free country. It is a country that is heroically defending themselves against a war criminal. But I don't have to deal with the war criminal. Donald Trump has to deal with the war criminal. Marco Rubio, Michael Waltz, Vice President Vance, they have to deal with the war criminal. I don't. So I don't have to be nice about what I say. I don't have to pretend. But I grew up in the school of Nixon. And when a lot of you people who are typing away on your keyboards, who've never had a security clearance, never worked at the top of government, never sat down with anyone who's negotiated a deal like this, are firing off your hot takes that Trump screwed this up, you're wrong. The people who screwed this up are the people around Zelensky. And President Zelensky screwed this up. Because you know what? You don't interrupt the President of the United States. You don't interrupt the Vice President of the United States. I don't care if they say your haircut's bad. You don't show up in your theater gear. You wear a coat and tie because you're going to the Oval Office of the United States. And I've been there a few times. You don't go in with your war gear. It's not a role to be played. So I'm kind of mad at Zelensky. I've had the Ukrainian ambassador on a couple of times to try and rally support for Ukraine. I support Ukraine. A lot of Republicans support Ukraine. And they're in the Senate, and I hope they're burning up the phone right now. And if all the keyboard warriors would just shut up and stop with your hot takes about Trump, if you care about Ukraine, if you want Ukraine to survive. Because what Trump said is, we're dealing with World War III here. He knows the measure of Putin. He knows what Putin has. I've said before, Putin is a war criminal, and Russia cannot be defeated because Russia is a nuclear superpower with thousands of nukes. We can defeat Hamas. We can defeat Iran. We have to deter China. You can't defeat Russia. It's Napoleon tried, Hitler tried. Zelensky's not going to defeat Russia. With Trump on his side, he can get a deal. He can get something. The man is a hero. He's brave. We don't want any more dead heroes. So if I were Zelensky, I'd get on the phone to Lindsey Graham and to Tom Cotton and to other people in the Senate of the United States like John Thune, who deal with and work with President Trump well, and ask, what do you think I ought to say to Brett Baer tonight? Because, boy, the stakes are high. I really mean that. I want Ukraine to survive and to be free and to be in a stable and enduring peace, and I want to arm them to the teeth so this doesn't happen again. We don't need another Biden saying a minor incursion doesn't matter. We don't need another Obama who doesn't do anything. We need Trump being strong And we need Zelensky to listen to his friends in the United States Senate, because that was a nightmare. I'm going to switch subjects. I'm going to talk a little bit about the budget, because in the budget is Ukraine aid, and we got to get that Ukraine aid. I'm going to talk with John Williams of the ALEC right after this. And then I'm going to talk with Charles C.W. Cook and Ben Domenech, because stakes are really high. J.D. Vance gave a great speech today at the Catholic Prayer Breakfast. I was prepared to just play it. Now I'll just attach it to the end of today's podcast. Wow. I got a lot of great sponsors. One of them is the American Legislative Exchange Council. And I hate it when I walk one of my friends into the middle of a car collision. Hello, John Williams. How are you? Tax economist on X. Did you see what happened today in the Oval?
I did. Yeah, good to see you, Hugh, and congrats on the afternoon show here. Very exciting.
Oh, my gosh. Greatest thing in the world. I'm not going to ask you to do foreign affairs. I just want the audience to know this isn't pre-recorded. John and I set this up. Jonathan Williams knows more about taxes than I ever will. We set this up a long time ago because I want to know about extending the tax cuts and what's going on in reconciliation. And I'm going to talk with Charles C.W. Cook after the break about Ukraine. I'm going to talk with Ben Domenech about Ukraine after the break. But I got to get to the bottom of this. And Jonathan is a guy I trust. So, Jonathan, what are you telling your members at ALEC about what the House passed and what the Senate is considering right now?
Well, I'll tell you what, Hugh, as you know well, ALEC has been very involved with our legislators over the course of the last several years, and even going back to 2017 for the original Trump tax cuts, the TCJA, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, as being something that put America's economy on rocket fuel and really took us to the next level and brought all those jobs back, brought that capital back to the United States for repatriation. And it's something that is essential right now, where it's not just, some people around this town in D.C. are talking about the politics of it. And that's obviously very important for the president, for Speaker Johnson and Leader Thune. But even more importantly is the economics of it, Hugh. And that if this doesn't get renewed and very quickly, this puts such a cloud over uncertainty of what's happening with the economy. We would be facing a multi-trillion-dollar tax increase. And so I think what Speaker Johnson did was just incredible to get that with such a narrow margin coming out of the United States House to get that budget resolution done. There's obviously things that maybe even you and I would like to see better from a fiscal perspective. But you know what? They got the vehicle done, and now they're setting up the stage for what this essential battle is going to be to preserve those Trump tax cuts. And heck, Hugh, maybe even go a little bit further and get that business tax rate down to 15% like the president has been talking about.
Jonathan, the only thing that I could see the Senate doing, other than time stamping their approval of the budget resolution from the House, is finding some more cuts so that the House could say, oh, yeah, we can do that. For example, notwithstanding any other law or regulation, specifically the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, the federal government workforce shall be decreased not less than 25%, not more than 50%, and whomever the president designates to do that, we're going to do that within this fiscal year in order to free up more money. Something like that. Another cut that would give the House more opportunity in Ways and Means. But I really don't know why this is going to take longer than a couple of days, maybe a week, for the Senate to approve, because we got a one-vote margin, Jonathan. There's not like a lot of margin here for them to screw around.
There is not. And, we're thankful that at ALEC we have nearly 100 members of this current Congress who are ALEC alumni members from when they served in their time in their state legislatures. So that's why I think we're very optimistic. Speaker Johnson is one of them. Leader Scalise is one of them. And so I think the voice of the states right now, we have an ALEC letter that more than 400 state legislators have signed to say permanently extend these tax cuts for the future of our economic growth as a country. And I think the Senate has got a little bit more of a cushion, as you mentioned there, Hugh. They're probably even stronger on a few of the policy topics, something that you and I have talked about a ton, that we at ALEC have talked about, and that is the whole issue of the state and local tax deduction, SALT deduction, that was a huge pay for in the original bill that probably gave us that alternative minimum tax nearly repealed because of that. And looking forward, that's a big contention point with the New York delegation right now on the House side. I think the Senate could bring a little bit more common sense to that topic and actually get us something that will not bust the budget as part of this tax deal as well. But to your point, Hugh, the issue of budget neutrality is so important that, we don't have to offset dollar for dollar on the tax side when we can find spending reductions, as you pointed towards. That's the key at the state level, where at the end of the day, 49 out of the 50 states have a balanced budget amendment. They have to do it every single year, Hugh.
So Jonathan, what is your advice? Members of the Senate listen to this program. Of course, state legislators listen across the United States. What's your advice to your Senate friends? 'Cause I got a lot of friends in the Senate, and they tell me the Byrd rule is complicated, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I understand that. We just need to get it done because we're like a heart attack away from losing the majority.
Well, and just even watching the equities markets in the last couple of days, I mean, we're teetering on, potentially some very bad things economically with inflation, being still persistent, with our national debt the way that it is. We need strong growth. I mean, this whole idea that some of the bean counters here in Washington say that we're not even going to hit 2% GDP growth over the long term. We need to take that model and throw it to the side and say we're going to demand 3% GDP growth, at least in this country. And how do you do that? Is you have pro-growth policies, deregulation like we're going to see with the Trump administration 2.0, but the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is absolutely necessary if we're going to have a shot at getting out of this hole that we have with the national debt.
So the 400 legislators, and by the way, if you're a legislator and you don't belong to ALEC, you're a dummy. Go join the American Legislative Exchange Council, alec.org. But Jonathan, those 400 members, did they take a position on what the Senate should do, or is it just extend the Trump tax cuts?
Well, I think when I talk to our legislators, they say, extend the Trump tax cuts and also get as much more as you can, right? I mean, we had constraints back in 2017 as well when we were looking at that. And the conference report came back and there were compromises at the end, like there always are in these kind of major legislative packages. But I think as we talk to our members, they'd like us to see us go further to get down to maybe 15% on the business tax rate and continue to drive growth economically in the United States. But when you combine that with the deregulatory efforts and so many other things being proposed with DOGE and just this kind of new sense of optimism in Washington around fiscal responsibility again and budget cuts, and how do we tackle this debt? Growth is always going to be a key element, and that's what we hear from our legislators every day.
Growth is what makes the rich state rich. And if you haven't gotten Rich State, Poor State yet, that's ALEC's premier publication. They do a lot of great stuff. They have a school choice book as well. Head over to alec.org, alec.org. You're going to be hearing about the state of the states throughout the year because we're just going to make it a priority that you know what's going on, whether it's school choice in Tennessee or a flat tax in Arizona, wherever it is, wherever there's innovation. We're going to bring Jonathan and other people from ALEC on to talk about it. Jonathan Williams, thank you. Follow him at Tax Economist. Jonathan, we got to worry about that name. I'm not sure a lot of people are going to rush to. You'll like Tax Economist on X. You really will. Jonathan gives you good stuff. Go follow him at Tax Economist on X. Thank you, Jonathan.
Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of
we
coming
are
out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak-
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Charles C.W. Cook, senior editor at National Review. Of course, he has his own podcast, Charles C.W. Cook. Charles, I played most of the meltdown in the Oval. Your reaction?
Well, I don't like it. I don't think that's how U.S. presidents should behave. I've seen a lot of people say that this is how world leaders talk to each other behind closed doors. I dare say that's true and should be true, given the stakes. But there are some things that are much better staying behind closed doors rather than being filmed in the Oval Office, and I think that was one of them.
Now, Rich Lowry posted over on X. I didn't see this live. I was in a meeting all morning, so I had to come back and listen to it. First thing I saw was Rich say, Zelensky was in a terrible position, but he never should have gotten sucked into making argumentative points. It should have been, 1, the war never would have happened with Trump. 2, I appreciate his efforts for peace. 3, We too want peace, but also what's in the best interest of our country. It goes on. It's very pacific. What I have just said, the only thing I think he ought to get on the phone with Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton, other supporters of Ukraine like me and like you, and find out what to do with Brett Baer, because that's going to be the most watched interview ever, other than a presidential debate. What do you think he should say in that interview?
Well, I wonder if he can say what he needs to say. And what I mean by that is that as a realpolitik description of how he should have gone about the interview, Rich Lowry is absolutely right. You have to play Trump. You have to know who Trump is. By this point, he should know who Trump is and how to talk to him. But if he doesn't know that by now, Hugh, if he made the mistake that he just made, which doesn't, by the way, let Trump off the hook completely, because acknowledging that someone is difficult doesn't forgive that difficultness, then I don't know how if he's going to be able to shift gears with Brett Baer. I mean, it just seems to me that what you have in that clip is a man, Zelensky, who showed up and got it wrong. He should have worn a suit.
Yes.
Official at the ground. That's important to Trump, so he should have done it. He should have done it because he's meeting world leaders in the Oval Office. He shouldn't have been belligerent. Trump should also have been the bigger man. He's the president of the United States. He should have said that the disagreements would continue behind closed doors. And J.D. Vance should not have taken the opportunity to blow the meeting up, which he did. I mean, I've seen some people say this was planned. I don't think it was planned in the sense that this was an ambush or this was the intent of Trump and Vance all along. I do think both of them are very frustrated with Zelensky, and they weren't unhappy about the opportunity to broadcast that live. So whether Zelensky can shift gears with Brett Baer, I don't know, because I just don't understand how, if I, who doesn't know an enormous amount about foreign policy and is not in charge of Ukraine, know that you don't do that when you're trying to negotiate with Donald Trump, how does he not know that?
Yeah, Charles, there's my first big job out of college was working for David Eisenhower, and then I went to work for Richard Nixon as a ghostwriter on The Real War. There's a chapter in The Real War about summitry. Never go to the summit unless you know what's on the other side. In other words, you work it all out beforehand. You don't freelance. I don't think J.D. freelanced. I listened to his whole speech to the Catholics this morning. Wonderful speech, by the way, fabulous speech. So I think gratitude matters a lot to J.D. Vance. Some people don't care about gratitude at all. Other people remember everything. And I think it means a lot to J.D. Vance. And I don't think there was any gratitude at all. And I don't even know that you need to believe it to say it, do you?
No, I mean, just to be clear, as I say, I don't think that it was planned like that. What I do think is, when you're very annoyed about something and it's been simmering for a long time, and then something happens that reminds you of it, or you see an opportunity to bring it up, and you know that it's going to blow up a meeting, you know that it's going to be a big deal, but you do it anyway because you're frustrated and you think this is the only way of changing the status quo. I think that's what J.D. Vance did today. That's not a defense, because I don't think that the vice president should do that. I have no problem whatsoever with world leaders talking to each other in the most belligerent terms behind closed doors. I just don't think that should happen in the Oval Office. I know some people like it. They think it's good for transparency. I just don't think that foreign policy is a realm where you want that.
Charles, I opened the show by saying I had fun with Trey Gowdy this weekend talking about the Melian dialogue because I learned about it my first week in college. I'd never read it before. And Trey threw out a reference to it. And I said, nobody knows what that is, Trey, the Melian dialogue? Really? And we had some fun, but I think this moment is going to be taught as part of International Relations 101, how not to do it for decades. Do you agree with me?
Yes, I do. I saw a lot of comments along the lines of, well, this would never have happened to Churchill. I think that that's probably true. But, Churchill said that no man had ever wooed a lover in the way that he wooed Franklin Roosevelt. Winston Churchill spent about half of his time between the outbreak of World War II and Americans coming into the war after Pearl Harbor, trying to work out how to make Franklin Roosevelt do what Britain needed Franklin Roosevelt to do. So, again, without downplaying what happened from Trump's end, which I've been very critical of, this is going to be one of those moments that is taught as a astonishing break with, well, astonishing break with the stakes, right? I mean, this is everything to Zelensky, and to allow himself to get into that situation is astonishing. It's
I'm
just
going to have Dwayne pull up a clip that I used earlier this week from the narration of Andrew Roberts' book, Masters and Commanders, where how did George C. Marshall counsel people to deal with FDR, which I want to play for you when we're back on the air. But I wonder, Charles, did you see the Ukrainian ambassador who's been a guest on this show? Because I'm a big supporter of Ukraine. She's been a big guest on this show a number of times. She had her head in her hands.
well, right. As I say, the stakes are very, very high, and I think her head was in her hands because she sensed that Zelensky had played it wrong, but also that she saw the mercurial and the ill-disciplined side of Donald Trump that I don't think is a credit to America.
Well, it isn't. It's not how Nixon would have handled it. It's not how, but it would never have happened. I really don't know how this happened, and you might be right that there's an itch that J.D. Vance had to scratch, and that is gratitude. You know, he mentioned something, Charles, the visit to the ammo factory in Pennsylvania with Josh Shapiro and a Democratic congressman. Yeah. Clearly, that bothers people. I laughed at that bothering people, but I guess it does.
Well, I think that should bother people. I don't think it should be the most important question by any stretch of the imagination. But I do see why that bothers people. And I think that was a blunder, and I said so at the time. I mean, you do not, when you're in a situation like Zelensky's, when you're allied with the United States, not with Joe Biden or Donald Trump, go and make it seem, even if it's not the case, as if you are endorsing or an organ of one of the two parties. That was a crazy move.
Charles, I mentioned to you earlier this week, I played a minute and 20-second clip from the book Masters and Commanders, one of the best book that Andrew Roberts has written out of many great books. And it's about FDR and Churchill, about George Marshall and Sir Alan Brooke, whom not many Americans know, but is the counterpart to George C. Marshall, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs for Great Britain during the war. And here is George C. Marshall writing a letter to an Army commander who's about to receive a visit from FDR. Can we play that clip?
Roosevelt conducted his own discussions on military strategy, sometimes without reference to Marshall, who resented it, but who saw that the president, charming, organizationally haphazard, brilliant, and extremely wily, needed very careful handling. An early insight into the way that Marshall did this is afforded by a private letter he wrote on the 22nd of November 1939 to Major General Asa Singleton, Commandant of the Infantry School, with suggestions for how to manage the president's forthcoming visit there. Whatever arrangement is made, Marshall counseled, no one press him to see this or that, or understand this or that. Whatever is furnished him in the way of data should be on one sheet of paper, with all high-sounding language eliminated, and with very pertinent paragraphed underlined headings. If anything needed to be explained, a little sketch of ordinary page size is probably the most effective method, as he is quickly bored by papers, lengthy discussions, and by anything short of a few pungent sentences of description. You have to intrigue his interest, and then it knows no limit.
So, Charles, that's George C. Marshall talking about FDR. You take your presidents as they come, I think.
Right. Yeah, and that's from the perspective, of course, of Churchill or those who wanted something from the president. And that matters enormously because those people need to get what they need to get, as Zelensky needs to get what he needs to get. But I, as an American citizen, can also judge the president by his behavior. I don't think all of Roosevelt's qualities, as described there and elsewhere, were positive. And I don't think Trump's are either. So what you have here is a president who often behaves badly, matched with a figure, Zelensky, who, astonishingly enough, by this point, has not learned how to handle him, and that led to that explosion.
Well, what we also have here is a country on the line, and not a NATO ally, but an ally of the United States, and our frontline allies, Poland, Romania, everybody that borders on Ukraine, they need Ukraine to stand strong, and we need it to stay free. And this didn't go well. And I just want to resurrect the opportunity. So let's talk, people listen to this show from both sides of the aisle. Forget the Democrat. What should Republicans be telling JD and Trump right now about diffusing and relighting or rekindling the fire of friendship?
Well, whether they will is a separate matter, but the biggest mistake that anyone can make in foreign affairs is to confuse the personalities for the nations and the stakes. And the first thing anyone who can get through to Trump and JD Vance should be saying is, fine, stipulated, he's annoying, or his behavior was bad, or he upset you, or his conduct was inappropriate, but can we remember what it is that we are talking about here, which, as you say, is Ukraine and the future of Eastern Europe? The Zelensky thing in American politics has become horribly personalized, in my view, on left and right. Some people absolutely adore and lionize him. Others seem to hate him. All of the fallout from today is about he said this, or he was ungrateful, or he argued. Again, true. I said it myself. He should have worn a suit. But the ultimate issue here is Ukraine, and I would hope there would be someone who can convey that to Trump and Vance, who must know it, but who didn't remember it this afternoon.
Yeah, there are tens of millions of Ukrainian Christians, for example. And J.D. Vance gave a speech today about Christianity and its value and its graces, said a prayer for Pope Francis. It was J.D. Vance at his best. I really do think it's a gratitude thing, that it's deeply ingrained in him, coming from where he came from, that he's grateful to the United States Marine Corps, he's grateful to Yale, he's grateful to the people who gave him a start in Silicon, very grateful. And he's got some advisors. There are these isolationists in the party, and he's not their enemy. He's not, I don't know that he's captured by them, but there are isolationists within the Republican tent. They love this. They're cheering today.
Yeah, well, they don't think that we should be helping Ukraine at all, and that falls, I think, into two camps. Some of those people just flatly don't believe that the United States should help anyone in the world, while there are still needs unmet in the United States, which practically means you would never help anyone because there will always be needs unmet. And then there are people who are a little more sophisticated who believe that the United States does not have a compelling interest in helping Ukraine. Now, that is a defensible argument. There are parts of the world where we really wouldn't have an interest, even though we would be able to see that a country was invaded and that this was illegitimate. We probably wouldn't have a good reason to get involved. I just don't buy that argument. That's why I'm not an isolationist. I don't think that America is unaffected by what happens to Eastern Europe. I don't think the removal of Ukraine as a buffer zone between Russia and Poland is an issue of no consequence. I don't think that the integrity of NATO is irrelevant. So, I'm not one of those people. I think you can maybe persuade one of the groups I described. You certainly can't persuade the other.
No, you can't. Charles, the president said to Zelensky, we're talking about World War III here. What that refers to, obviously, I've said Putin is a war criminal, but Russia can't be defeated in any kind of traditional sense of defeating a nation state because they got thousands of nukes. To what extent do you think the president really is thinking about that risk?
I think it does worry him, but that it's also a convenient pretext for his desire for peace. Now, I don't say that entirely disparagingly. I, having watched this president for a long time, genuinely think he is horrified by war and death. Yes. I read reports in the first administration of him pulling back planned American action around the world because he was shown the likely casualty figures. He seems to be more bothered by that, and this is to his credit, than most people who've been president of the United States. So I do think he worries about it. I also think that is a talking point you hear from a lot of people who are just tired of funding Ukraine and who want to bring this whole thing to a close. So where one ends and the other starts, I don't quite know.
Okay, so Secretary Rubio said nothing, as far as I can tell, in this meeting. Do you think he has a role here between now and Brett Baer, and then tonight and tomorrow, that perhaps nobody else can fill?
Well, if he does, it's going to be behind closed doors, because the first thing he did was tweet praise for Donald Trump for having put America first, in his words. Now, of course, he's serving at the pleasure of the president. He is not an independent source of power. So if he's going to play a role here, it's going to be in back channels, not publicly, which is where this whole thing should have been conducted from the beginning. I find it very difficult to believe, knowing Marco Rubio's history, and he was my senator for a long time, that he wants Zelensky's last actions in America to have been essentially expelled from the White House and then gone home.
I agree. I agree with everything there. Charles, we live in an environment that feeds upon itself continually. We're talking about something that happened an hour ago, and we'll be talking about what happens in 2 hours with Brett Baer. I am blessed by going on vacation next week. I get to go play with my grandkids and be off the air for a week. I don't have to say anything or tweet anything. What's your advice to people? I mean, there are emergency podcasts and there's audience to be had. What's your advice to people about commenting on this?
On the meeting that we just saw, or in our politics in general?
No, the meeting we just saw. I like the feedback loop that is developed. I think it's very healthy. I'm not sure I have much more to say about this.
No, I mean, the problem with this story is we saw that remarkable clip, and you and I have talked about it for the last 15 minutes, and we have absolutely no idea what is happening diplomatically.
Correct.
And Trump's statement afterwards was both harsh and soothing. As I say, Marco Rubio said yeah to Trump and then is probably on the phone right now. So my advice would be comment away on what we just saw, as we just have, but don't assume that it tells the whole story or you know what is going on, because in foreign policy you very often don't.
Yes. Have we talked before about Palmerston? Country has permanent interests, but no permanent enemies or allies.
Yeah.
Actually, Ukraine is our permanent ally, even if people don't understand it. We might get along with Russia, but we're never ever going to be friends with Putin. And I just want to close on that. Do you agree or disagree with me on that?
Oh, I agree. Not only is that true, that ought to be true.
Well said. Charles C.W. Cook, thank you. I appreciate the extra time today. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming right back. I'm going to talk with Ben Domenech about the same things. But I do want to remind you that Dennis Prager is recovering, and we hope he's doing better. In the meantime, you can get a little dose of Dennis every single day. Here's a bit of Dennis Prager from Pragertopia.
This is the Dennis Prager Show. We have a good time every day, even if the world is falling apart. Altadena, California. Rick, thank you for calling. Rick, Dennis Prager.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, I was just wondering how an argument between you and your wife would go, in that you're the logical discourse king, and I don't know about you, but that doesn't work with my wife.
Yeah, go listen to the answer at Pragertopia. While you're online, go visit our friends at Job Creators Network, educationfreedomusa.com, educationfreedomusa.com. There are fights all over the United States. We're focused on Zelensky and Trump today, but there are fights going on that will affect your children everywhere in the United States, or your grandchildren, where education freedom is on the line. Get involved, find out where those fights are, and come down on the side of school choice. Education freedom is a basic civil right that has been denied for too long to too many people who are trapped in poorly performing schools. Job Creators Network is committed to changing that. But to change it, you've got to go and become part of the movement. Go to educationfreedomusa.com, brought to you by our sponsor, Job Creators Network, educationfreedomusa.com, educationfreedomusa.com. Ben Domenech is my guest on the Hugh Hewitt Show. He is editor-at-large at The Spectator. He's a Fox News contributor. And if you are not a subscriber to The Spectator, you want to go and get a couple of free issues, because Ben sat down with Donald Trump. Very interesting interview. I've read it. Ben, welcome. It's better to be lucky than smart in this business, and I'm very lucky to have you. I don't know when you sat down with the president, but that's a heck of a good interview, and it's very relevant to the meltdown in the Oval today, don't you think?
It certainly is, and I sat down with him yesterday for things kept getting pushed back a bit, but I was worried the interview would end up short. It ended up being, including the off-the-record stuff, 90 minutes, which is the longest interview he's done in the second term. Obviously, he hasn't. It's half a Rogan,
that's a good way to put it. Half a Rogan,
and his first magazine interview after returning to office, and it was, as you saw, a wide-ranging conversation. But certainly, some of the things that he said really do, I think, preview to what happened today. Which, can I just say, I've been sounding this note on the way that Zelensky has misplayed his hand repeatedly, and I know I've done it to you too. And we say that not out of any kind of bias against Zelensky. It's that we want Ukraine to be able to functionally do what it needs to do, and Zelensky is making it harder by the decisions that he's made, and he's done that repeatedly. And I don't, the people who have advised him have given him bad advice, or his instincts are simply bad about how to deal with Trump. I have never seen someone, hurt themselves so much when it's obvious how to deal with this. And from my perspective, and if I could just say,
well, I want to add one thing. Ben was the first guy to remind me that Zelensky went to the ammo factory in Pennsylvania with Josh Shapiro and a defeated congressman. And guess what? J.D. Vance brought up sua sponte today, that visit. Yeah. So you obviously were on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the situation that he, brought upon himself in the sense that, look, you and I know how to play this situation, which is you walk in and you are the biggest fan of this deal. This deal, which is actually not that great of a deal, to be honest, on paper. I think it's just okay. You come in and you say, this is the Trump peace deal of, the best rare earth mineral deal that's ever been struck, blah, blah, blah. That's the front-facing thing that you do for the cameras, okay? If you have concerns of the nature that you have about this, you do that behind the scenes. You don't do it in front of the press. And then when you provoke him in the way that Zelensky did, whose interests are you serving here? Are you trying to just kind of pose for the press that's in the room that you have a better relationship with than this new administration? He made a bad bet, and he should have made up for it in this visit when it came to that Pennsylvania tour. And that, to me, is something that is just a total indictment. And look, Lindsey Graham is out there right now saying it may be impossible to work with him. He may need to resign in order to save the bilateral, save this kind of relationship. And that's something that, when you hear that from Lindsey Graham, he's not someone who is aligned ideologically with J.D. Vance on this stuff. He's saying something, though, that I think a lot of people look at and say, can something even be done with this guy now? And I don't know. I
mentioned this to Charles C.W. Cook, and I want to hear from you about this interview and what you might have had clues. But when I went to work for RN in 1978, we were writing a book called The Real War, and there's a chapter in there called The Summit. And the takeaway, and RN believe, you never go to the summit unless you know what's on the other side. Zelensky went to the summit not knowing what was on the other side, and Starmer spelled it out, Macron spelled it out, Trump spelled it out, J.D. Vance spelled it out. Everybody telegraphed what had to be on the other side. And I honestly think the people advising him, this is a guess, I don't know, are Biden people. They're people who were tight with Biden. But I will tell you this, even in terms of the after action reports on this, I was just reading in Politico's reporting, and they actually have talked to some ex-Biden officials, and they are astounded by this, and they think it's terrible. I don't know if you've seen the picture yet of the Ukraine ambassador with her head in her hands. Oh, yeah. I mean, this is horrible for them, and whoever has been advising him on this, who he's been listening to, because I do think he has a lot of cooks in the kitchen. They have led him down a path that is just terrible for him. It is going to result in a worse deal if things don't turn around in a very rapid way. Putin is the happiest man on the planet. Putin, the war criminal Putin, thinks he swept the table today. And
he completely. I mean, this is defeat from the mouths of peace, if not, victory and that sort of thing. And it's just like, it's astounding. But I think, and we can get to the interview, but I do think that this is something that has been percolating for a long time.
Well, let's go there. First of all, who's in the room with you? Is it just the president, or Susie Wiles there? Is Stephen Chung?
No, I'm happy to. So the president was there, Caroline Leavitt was there, Stephen Chung, and Margot, one of his press people, and then, of course, Natalie Harp, who is always at his side. And
you bet.
I was glad to say happily printed out that beautiful chart for me.
And was he behind the desk?
Sorry?
Was he behind the Resolute desk?
Yes, he was. We were across each other.
Tell people if there were any hints. They can go read the interview, but there's body language and stuff like that, and there's off-the-record stuff. Sure. And any hints that this was planned? This blow-up?
No. In fact, he seemed quite relaxed, and he seemed. But one thing that I do think was coming across in terms of his conversation about Ukraine was just this attitude of being very clear-eyed about the priority is the ending of the war, the priority is peace, and then we can talk about what things look like afterwards. And that was, it came through both in that, but I think he was not itching for a fight, if that's what you mean. There was no indication that he seemed to be particularly aggressive about it. And if anything, he was happy to talk to me about everything under the sun, except I will say he definitely had been talking about Britain all day and was eager to move on to other topics. The thing that I will say as well is that, you say one last question, and then we went on for another 20, 25 minutes.
The greatest thing in the world, but
talking about sports and football and things like that, and he was happy to keep on
He's
going.
the best interview ever because you have no idea what he's going to say, and he'll say it at length. Let me ask you, did JD come up? Because I think it's very purposeful what he's doing with the vice president. It's what Ike did with RN, which is send him around the world, include him in every meeting, treat him like he's a very smart guy who doesn't know anything that Eisenhower know, therefore I'm going to teach him. Did JD come up in the off-the-record stuff?
I'll just give you this because there are some things that I'm gonna have a magazine piece that will be our next cover for the Spectator, and it will go into some of those offside things. But yes, we talked a little bit more about the vice president, about the role that he's had there, and quite frankly, it was part of this overall discussion about the fact that he's including all these people now who have had the experience on the ground, where last time he felt the need to bring in all these generals who he assumed would serve, a good purpose in terms of their experience and in terms of the plaudits over their career. But then I think he learned that actually a lot of those people were, kind of long in the truth, out of touch, or just didn't really have the attitude toward government that he wanted to see. And so he's got a lot of these people who are younger, who are aggressive, I think, and who are also, speaking from the experience of having lived through the period of the war on terror in their own personal lives in a way that is really unprecedented in terms of the team that a president has built. The other thing I'll just say, he's got a copy now of the Declaration of Independence, one of the original copies in his off room that I saw.
Oh wow!
And it's an amazing thing to behold. And you can talk about all the other things, the magazine covers and how you've got all these great presidents, filling up the Oval, in terms of the paintings and things that he got out of storage and put back in there. But the thing that is really interesting about it is he basically has brought back all these, aspects of Americana to the White House that were really absent, frankly, over the last 4 years, and deserve to be back in there. And just they lend one of the questions that I had in there was whether looking at all these pictures of presidents, if it was something that inspired him, or if it was something that was intimidating on some level, because you are surrounded by.
What did he say?
Well, he said that he believed in the seriousness of the job, and that this was something that that he believed was something that was a sort of point of conviction. Basically, was the intimation.
Okay, I don't remember this, but I'm going to have to go back and read it. And I'm going to come back to your interview with the president and Zelensky when we come back on the air. I don't want to deny the on-air audience any of that. So I want to ask you about the budget during this 3-minute interlude. House has passed a budget with no votes to spare. Why hasn't the Senate just put the chop on it and sent it back?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that this is just like you're not going to get a better outcome than this. It's not ideal, but it was hard getting there. I think that there shouldn't really be any question about it. I mean, for Republicans, you've got to get moving on so many other things. Get this done.
The only other thing they could do is maybe find more cuts, because if you find more cuts, or I sent a friend today language, notwithstanding any of the law regulation and specifically the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, the president is hereby authorized to reduce the federal government by not less than 25% and not more than 50% of non-uniform members within fiscal year 25. So you can give them more wiggle room in the House Ways and Means, but I don't think the Byrd rule stops them from just chopping this, does it?
No, I don't think it does. And I look, and personally, this is such a broken process, Hugh, and you know it, and we have to get away from it. We have to get back to the way that this is supposed to work. But in terms of the president's administration and the way that he's hit the ground running, which to me is really the story of this presidency, is the lessons that he took from the prior experience, feeling, being new to politics, feeling like he was surrounded by enemies. Is this time around he's decided to move as quickly as possible because he doesn't want to waste any of the momentum that he has. And he's done a very good job of that. Republicans should learn that lesson too and not sit on their laurels. There are way too many people, in my view, Hugh, who are on the Republican side of the aisle, including a lot of smart conservatives who should know better, who feel like they think of this as a much bigger victory than it was.
Oh, and they don't remember Jim Jeffords. I am, my first year in syndication was, second year in syndication was Jim Jeffords' big jump. Everything can change in one day. You got to get your wins. Yeah,
and that to me is something that some of these people are not fully understanding. They have this attitude as if the wind is at their back. Democrat foolishness when it comes to things like boys and girls sports and radical issues like that is something that's just going to remain a sort of an ace in the hole. You know who sounded like that? Just recently, all those Democrats who thought that abortion was going to be their ace in the hole forever. They all sounded like that. Okay, after the last midterms, they all believed. I mean, I had someone very smart, Silicon Valley person, come up to me and say that they were 100% confident that Kamala was going to win a month out from the election because of the abortion issue. And and that was someone who I think is very centrist. And my reaction to that was, I don't think so. I don't think it's an ace in the hole. I think, in fact, they've underestimated.
I'm here to guarantee you, we're going to lose the House in 2026. Yeah. I think we should hold on to the Senate because I think Tom Tillis and Susan Collins are great candidates, and we ought to pick up Georgia, maybe steal Minnesota or Michigan. But we're going to lose the House, and so just be on notice. You get two reconciliations.
In 1960, Richard Nixon knew the election was stolen. He made the decision to walk away. And then, obviously, after Watergate, he gets, facing impeachment, et cetera, he chooses to walk away again. Is one of the lessons of history that you've got to just keep fighting, that you got to keep fighting?
So Richard Nixon was a different kind of a guy, and he was a tough cookie, and he was very smart. People don't realize how smart he was. But he made one bad decision. He didn't fight. I spoke to his family. They say he regretted that until the day he died. He didn't fight.
I don't think anybody's been surrounded by as many enemies as you, other than him, perhaps.
Yeah, he had a lot. I might have had more.
You might have had more.
I think he's had more because media is bigger now. Ben Domenech is my guest. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Ben, that was a great bit. I always talk Nixon whenever I can with Trump, because I think there are parallels. Tell me now, if Richard Nixon was going to send a message to Donald Trump via the angels, what would it be right now about Ukraine?
Well, I think it would be a very realist message about the need for peace is paramount. I mean, Nixon wanted to think so much of himself, in that capacity, and having the willingness to, I think, negotiate this to the finish line in order to get peace first and then to get resolution to the broader matters I think a message that Richard Nixon would be consistent with in terms of Trump's approach. I'm curious your own thoughts on that. I wanted to ask that question because I thought that he would have an interesting opinion on this, and he obviously did. but it's also a question that I think is kind of central to his understanding that, he, I think, fought in terms of the political side of things, not expecting for them to come after him in the way that they did after he got out of office. And then when that happened, I think it changed his attitude in a lot of ways. He referred to them as just, vicious in terms of the way that they came after him. He talks about, having to fight for survival, and he doesn't just mean that in terms of the assassinations. He means that in terms of the lawfare and the way that people came after him and attempting to bankrupt him and put him in jail. And look, whether you actually can do a count about the number of enemies he had or not, I think he's probably right. He does probably have totally more.
There are more people. There are more people with platforms.
There are more people in it.
I'll say this: that I've thought a lot about Nixon and Trump, and I spent a lot of time with Richard Nixon, and he never, but one time, looked backwards. He always looked forwards, and he wouldn't talk about Watergate. He didn't want to talk about Watergate. He didn't want to talk about Vietnam. He wanted to write about the future and think about the future and talk about the future. And I think Trump is very forward-looking. But the people who wounded Nixon, he never forgot who did it. And the people who wounded, Trump has mentioned how they searched his wife's bedroom. And today, J.D. Vance brought up not being thankful and brought up the visit to Pennsylvania. I think gratitude and the ledger matter to both these guys a lot, and Zelensky blew off both. And I'm not mad at Zelensky. The guy's fighting a war. People are trying to kill him every day. He's got bad advisors. I think if Nixon could say anything to Trump right now, it would be the peacemaker. Call him up. Tell him to come back tonight.
Yeah, and I think that's the, whatever it takes to do that in this moment is what's paramount to Trump. The way that he talks about the vicious nature of war and the way that it's tearing apart young people, et cetera. Again, in the interview that I did and elsewhere, I think it speaks to that motive on his part. And, the attitude that he has of, I'm not aligned with anybody, I'm aligned with the good of the United States of America. That attitude is one that I think, motivates him on so many different levels. And I think he's tired of the accusations and of feeling like this is a situation where he's at a disadvantage or that he gets judged for looking out for what he feels is the American interest in this.
Now, that brings us to the impact of this explosion. Whatever happens, how do you think this played with Americans today?
I think Americans, especially Americans who have, in polling data pretty consistently indicated in recent months that they feel they want a negotiated peace. I think that this made Zelensky look petulant. I think it made him look, frankly, disrespectful. And it's the kind of thing that tends to sour Americans on somebody to see that kind of thing happen. I think that the media folks who've been boosting Zelensky after this are going to have to do a lot of cleanup mode in order to try to change that, because the natural inclination of a lot of people, I think, is going to listen to this and say, this guy does not seem like he's grateful for what America has done and how much treasure America has poured into this situation. And for the European situation, they are, I already have multiple emails from people on the other side of the pond saying, oh my gosh, this is disastrous, or we are mesmerized by this. We cannot believe that this just happened. It's just an unprecedented fail, I think, on the part of a nation that we have poured so much into.
Now, Ben, many people have hot takes. I am blessed by going on vacation to play with my grandkids next week. I don't have to say a word about this after the program today. And I'm not going to, because I don't know that I can contribute anything to make a bad situation better. What do you think about people who are just eager to get their hot takes out there? Because right now people are proving up their priors, and it's not any damn good for anybody.
Yeah, no, I completely agree on that point. And the other thing is that there's a level of unseriousness about this that I think we should avoid. The people on the right who've postured about Zelensky and frankly lied about him, I don't think that this is something where you can take any kind of victory lap. I think that this is a diplomatic failure and one that could have been easily avoided with better advisors and a wiser approach to dealing with the current situation. I don't think it's any kind of vindication of the nasty, I think, rumor mongering that some people have done about Ukraine or about Americans dealing with someone who is anti them in some instance. I just think this is a botch. I think it's a huge botch.
Now, let me close by. Did you listen to J.D. Vance's speech to the Catholic prayer breakfast today?
I just got that in my inbox. I've been doing a number of cleanup stuff and follow up on my interview, so haven't had a chance to read it yet.
It is kind and generous. He stops to pray for for Pope Francis, and he talks about not needing to have hot takes on everything. It's really kind of a thoughtful piece. I'll put it at the end of today's podcast. I would recommend it to you. Did you talk about God at all with Trump? I don't think you did.
No, because that was not something that I, had looked at. Our conversation, though, it did get a little personal in some things that were not included in the transcript just because they came before the recorder was on. But there's still things that I can note and that kind of thing. I think I think in many ways, look, this is a changed president. This is the third time that I've interviewed Trump. One time as a candidate, one time as president the first time around, and now this. He's very different. He seems very different to me. His attitude is different. He, I think, really has, people talk about it, but just seeing it up close, there's an aspect of this that I think he is thinking more about legacy and about doing as much positive good for the American people as he possibly can. And I think that the idea that he is in some kind of vindictive mood is at odds with what I actually saw.
And it's interesting. I
think he's much more in a mindset about his legacy.
The next 48 hours will tell us a great deal about that. Really. It's a very critical moment right now for Donald Trump, and especially for Ukraine and the West. Ben Domenech, congrats on a great interview. Go get The Spectator. Follow Ben online at bdomenech. I missed most of the drama this morning because at 9 o'clock I walked into a meeting that my friend Bud the contractor had arranged for a Christian missionary, Middle Eastern guy, to talk about the church in the Middle East. And there were dozen and a half people there. And it was fascinating. And then I get in the car to come to the studio, and I look at my messages, and they're blowing up. And I get to the studio, and Dwayne's got it cut so I can go back through it. And the show that I had arranged before I went to this meeting this morning was, I had listened to J.D. Vance's speech at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast this morning, and I had given Dwayne a couple of requests on how to cut it up. I'm going to play some of it for you now because I thought it was a fabulous. It's only 29 minutes long. I'm going to attach it at the end of today's podcast if you've missed it. And here, let's play a couple bits of it here. Cut number 2.
I believe, Maureen, and maybe this is wrong, that I'm the first Catholic convert to ever be Vice President of the United States. And I appreciate that. I appreciate you guys clapping because it turns out there are some people on the internet who don't like Catholic converts. And in fact, there are some Catholics who appear not to like Catholic converts. I've learned that the hard way, but of course the gross majority of my brothers and sisters in Christ have been incredibly welcoming and incredibly charitable, and for that I'm grateful. And I wanted to just reflect on that, on being a Catholic, and particularly a Catholic convert in public life, in the hopes that maybe it would provide some wisdom or some guidance or maybe just some interesting stories for those of you who are enjoying your breakfast. And one of the things that I try to remind myself of as a convert is that there's a lot I don't know. When I was a kid, we used to call new converts to the faith baby Christians, and I recognize very much that I am a baby Catholic, that there are things about the faith that I don't know, and so I try to be humble as best I can when I talk about the faith in publicly, because of course I'm not always going to get it right, and I don't want my inadequacies in describing our faith to fall back on the faith itself. And so if you ever hear me pontificating about the Catholic faith, please recognize it comes from a place of deep belief, but it also comes from a place of not always knowing everything all the time. And, I say that, of course, I don't try to comment on every single Catholic issue. I try not to get involved in the civil wars between Dominicans and Jesuits and conservative Catholics and progressive Catholics. But as Michael Corleone said in The Godfather, sometimes they pull me back in. Sometimes I can't help. I can't help but spout off. I am a politician after all, ladies and gentlemen. But the thing that I have tried, I've tried to remind people of, and the thing that I try to remind myself of, is that what attracted me to the Christian faith and what attracted me to this church in particular is the recognition that grace is not something that happens instantaneously. It's something that God works in us over a long period of time, sometimes many years and sometimes many decades. You know, I think that when I was a kid, my assumption is that grace is something where the Holy Spirit would come in and it would solve all of our problems. And I learned the hard way as a Catholic, in part by following the sacramental life as best as I could, that grace is very much a process, that God works in us over time. He makes us closer to Him and makes us better people in the process. And so when I first became a Catholic, you know, I would probably go to confession every other week because I would fail to go to Mass every other week. And, you know, things would come up. You'd have business trips. You'd have, you know, the kids would get sick. And I just remember that this process of thinking, okay, if I don't go to church this week, I'm going to have to go and talk to some stranger about everything that I did bad the last 2 weeks. And that process worked in me a much better discipline, a much better prayerful life. And, you know, I'm batting probably like 95% of Sundays now that I actually go to Mass. And so, you know, this is I think, one of the geniuses. Thank you. I think this is one of the geniuses of our faith, is that it teaches us through repetition in some ways, and it forms us through a process, of course, that is, I think, at the heart of the mystery of faith, that somehow by practicing the sacraments, even imperfectly, as I certainly do, God transforms us.
Pretty good theology, by the way. By the way, if you can't speak Catholic, you don't know Catholic, you may not receive the sacrament of the Eucharist if you have missed Mass. That's like one of our black letter law rules. And so a lot of bad Catholics like me, if you miss one, it's hard to miss one, but it's easy to miss four. Because once you've missed, you can't receive, so what's the point? And I've had like 5,000 priests tell me that's not good theology. I know, but it's human theology. More from J.D. Vance before the blowout. This is important stuff. Stay tuned. I'm going on vacation next week. I've said my piece about President Trump, Vice President Vance, President Zelensky. I'm going to watch the Brett Baer interview with great interest, but Dwayne has to do the work on Monday to figure it out. Then Kurt Schlichter's in, Mark Davis, Ed Morrissey, Dwayne. I'll be back in a week. I do want to make sure you hear J.D. Vance this morning, cut number 6, at the Catholic Prayer Breakfast.
I think that what I would say is that it's not in the best interest of any of us, again, to treat the religious leaders of our faith as just another social media influencer. And I think, frankly, that goes in both ways. If I can be so bold, I think it's incumbent upon our religious leaders to recognize that in the era of social media, people will hang on every single word that they utter, even if that wasn't their intention, and even if a given declaration wasn't meant for consumption in the social media age. But every day since I heard of Pope Francis's illness, I say a prayer for the Holy Father, because while, yes, I was certainly surprised when he criticized our immigration policy in the way that he has, I also know that the Pope, I believe that the Pope is fundamentally a person who cares about the flock of Christians under his leadership. And he's the man... And he's a man who cares about the spiritual direction of the faith. And I say this because every day, me and my children have said a prayer for the Holy Father. And we pray for his health, and we pray for his comfort as he deals with what appears to be a pretty serious health crisis.
Pope, if it's news to you, has suffered an episode this afternoon, which is very serious, a bronchospasm. He's being given mechanical ventilation, so that prayer is welcome right now. I want you to hear what the Vice President said about Pope Francis as well. Cut number 7.
I think all of us can remember that moment of the Holy Father standing in an empty St. Peter's Square, holding the Eucharist above his head, and giving a sermon that I return to consistently because it was incredibly meaningful to me at the time, and it remains meaningful today. And so if you'll forgive me, I hope that you'll be okay with me reading just an excerpt of the homily that Pope Francis gave. When evening had come, which of course is from Mark chapter 4, verse 35, the gospel passage we have heard begins like this. For weeks now it has been evening. Thick darkness has gathered over our squares, our streets, and our cities. It has taken over our lives, filling everything with a deafening silence and a distressing void that stops everything as it passes by. We feel it in the air. We notice it in people's gestures. Their glances give them away. We find ourselves afraid and lost. Like the disciples in the gospel, we were caught off guard by an unexpected, turbulent storm. We have realized that we are on the same boat, all of us fragile and disoriented, but at the same time important and needed. All of us called to row together, each of us in need of comforting the other. On this boat are all of us, just like those disciples who spoke anxiously with one voice, saying, "We are perishing." So we too have realized that we cannot go on thinking of ourselves, but only together can we do this. It is easy to recognize ourselves in this story. What is harder to understand is Jesus' attitude. While his disciples are quite naturally alarmed and desperate, he is in the stern, in the part of the boat that sinks first. And what does he do? In spite of the tempest, he sleeps on soundly, trusting in the Father. This is the only time in the Gospels we see Jesus sleeping. When he wakes up, after calming the wind and the waters, he turns to the disciples in a reproaching voice. Why are you afraid? Have you no faith? Let us try to understand. And what does the lack of the disciples' faith consist, as contrasted with Jesus' trust? They had not stopped believing in him. In fact, they called on him. But we see how they call on him. Teacher, do you not care if we perish? Do you not care, they think, that Jesus is not interested in them, does not care about them? One of the things that hurts us in our families most when we hear said is, do you not care about me? It is a phrase that wounds and unleashes storms in our hearts. It would have shaken Jesus too, because he, more than anyone, cares about us. Indeed, once they have called on him, he saves his disciples from their discouragement. The storm exposes our vulnerability and uncovers those false and superfluous certainties around which we have constructed our daily schedules, our projects, our habits, and priorities. It shows us how we have allowed to become dull and feeble the very things that nourish, sustain, and strengthen our lives and our communities. The tempest lays bare all our prepackaged ideas and forgetfulness of what nourishes our people's souls. All those attempts that anesthetize us with ways of thinking and acting that supposedly save us, but instead prove incapable of putting us in touch with our roots and keeping alive the memory of those who have gone before us. We deprive ourselves of the antibodies we need to confront adversity. And I think that is an amazing phrase. That what we do so often in our lives, in our public life, in our private lives, is we deprive ourselves of the antibodies we need to confront adversity.
It is a beautiful speech, and I'll attach it to the end of the podcast. If you go to Highly Concentrated Hugh, all 29 minutes of it, he didn't start the day planning to ambush Zelensky. That's why I want you to hear it. And he started the day praying for Pope Francis, who, as I said, had a bad episode today, bronchospasm, so keep him in your prayers. What did the markets make of today? AmericanFederal.com brings you a market report every day. That's Nick Grovich and his team at 1-800-221-7694. Counterintuitively, and markets are always counterintuitive, the Dow went up 1.4%, the S&P went up 1.6%, the NASDAQ went up 1.6%, and gold went down. Gold went down by 1% to 2,868. So maybe today is the day you want to buy gold, or maybe today is the day you have to sell gold. Whether you're buying or selling, do it with Nick and the team you can trust at 1-800-221-7694. And I say people that you can trust because you can. I know Nick. People I know Nick. People do business with Nick. I've done business with Nick. I bought gold from Nick. It's the best place to go if you're going to buy or sell gold or silver. 1-800-221-7694 or go to AmericanFederal.com. AmericanFederal.com. Tarzana Joe, the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Hello, Joe.
Well, you know, I was working on a poem about the Zimmerman telegram, but under the circumstances, I thought we might need a lighter moment. I don't like to ask for anything. I've never found it fun. Even when I'm praying, I just say, "Thy will be done." But here's a twist on scripture I think we all believe. If you never ask, then it's unlikely you'll receive. It follows even pundits and sophisticated sages have to ask their publishers to run opinion pages. I've written epic verses for years with little rest, and so I have just one request I'm getting off my chest. I graduated high school some 50 years ago.
Whoa.
There is this big reunion thing. I think I have to go. I haven't won the Stanley Cup. There's been no Nobel Prize. I need a little something to impress those high school guys. There is this one position, and I hear it's time for hiring. We have a poet laureate whose 2-year term's expiring. I think I could be useful. I think you'll all agree. So if you know the president, put in a word for me. There, I've made my little pitch. That's all I'm going to say. And as for that reunion, could you get this done by May? That's selfish? Yes, by Tarzana Joe.
But as I always tell law students, nobody can read your mind. You have to tell them what you want. So Joe for Poet Laureate. Yes, I'm all for that. You can enter your approval of that over at tarzanajoe.com, where all of Joe's poems are collected. His books are available. And indeed, if you want to get a poem for any occasion, you just write to him at tarzanajoe@reagan.com, tarzanajoe@reagan.com. Say a prayer for Francis. I know that Joe will too. And hopefully he'll be here when I get back from vacation too.